It is a common misconception that because the Americans moved their headquarters to Southampton 4 weeks before D-Day that it became another US Army port. This is not true. For example, the present-day owners of the Port ABP-associated British port say that, on D-Day, the US Army, specifically the 14th Major Port Transportation Corps, exercised primary jurisdiction over Southampton, which was designated Area C and served as the chief supply and troop movement center for American forces. However, this is simply not accurate. On D-Day, apart from a few isolated US Army units, they could not occupy the port because it was used as the primary embarkation port for British and Commonwealth forces, with over 2/3 of the total army embarking from Southampton. Aside from the 5th and 8th Divisions, which embarked from Northern Ireland in late June and early July, and the 9th Armoured Group, which loaded at Swansea in the Bristol Channel area, it was only after D-Day that the bulk of the US Army build-up forces moved through the southern base section, with Southampton and its subports playing the major role in outloading. Throughout Operation Overlord, jurisdiction was shared between American and British forces, which is illustrated by film of a US Army military policeman checking credentials at Dock Gate 8 supervised by an ordinary British constable. Jurisdiction was something that neither force took lightly. The US Army embarked from ports to the west of Southampton, however, had to earn the confidence of the local population before they were accepted. The same principle applied at Southampton, which, because of the benefit of a double high tide, meant that double the number of troops could be loaded than any other port on the south coast. Together with the impressive infrastructure linked to the national railway system, this meant that after D-Day it was used by the Americans to funnel their forces to the continent. The Southern Daily Echo reported on the 16th of June, 1945, how Southampton supplied invasion armies is told for the first time that Colonel Kaiser not only commands the Southampton installation of the 14th port but a detachment located at Plymouth. Until recently, the port also conducted activities at Poole, Weymouth, Portland, Dartmouth, Totnes, Falmouth, Truro, and Hale as well. At all times, American Army operations at Southampton have been carried on with the greatest harmony. Perhaps the greatest single contributory factor to this relationship has been the working of two local groups, the Port Emergency Committee and the Port Operational Executive Committee. These groups are made up of representatives of every agency involved at Southampton docks, the railways, the Admiralty, British Sea Transport and Movements, stevedoring concerns, and the United States Army. Careful planning by these bodies has prevented many difficulties, and remedial action taken by them has solved others. The marvellous record of Southampton during World War II is in itself a tribute to the smooth workings of these committees. So how then has the misconception arisen that Southampton was exclusively an American port during World War II? Well, a clue may lie in the same newspaper article which says, from May 31 to July 25, 1944, the port was commanded by Colonel Leo J. Meyer. He was succeeded by Colonel Sherman L. Kaiser, the present port commander. To those unfamiliar with the history of the port, may understand from this description that these Americans did in fact control the port. But what the Echo reporter is referring to is the US Army unit designation, the 14th Major Port, not the port of Southampton, which has led to a deal of confusion. Both the US Army officers were awarded UK Medals of Honor. In their citations, Colonel Kaiser is described as always most anxious to cooperate, and his relations with the Royal Navy, police, local authorities, Southern Railway and Harbour Board were equally cordial and helpful. Whilst Colonel Meyer worked in the closest touch with the British Army, his willing and untiring efforts to do all in his power to further the common cause was most marked.